All right, welcome back. Tuesday training for practitioners. So glad to have you guys here. I see many of you are already here. Lori's here. Welcome. Gary's here. Welcome. Anna's coming in. Awesome. Cheryl, good to see you. Love having you guys here. Tuesday training for practitioners. Here we go. I'm excited to have you all here. Oh, and another recording button. Okay. All right. We've got it all. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday training. So happy to have you here. We are talking muscle tightness, not pain types, muscle tightness. We're talking. I caught myself. How many times did I say that last week before I was actually back on track? No, you're generous. I think it was like 22. But anyway, I said it many times, and we're on muscle tightness today. We have 4 types of muscle tightness that we've been exploring. We're officially over the hump. We got through muscle tightness number 1 and muscle tightness number 2. We'll do a brief just recap on those before we dive in to the last 2, number 3 and number 4. Lots of information to share with you about that as well. So that's on deck for today. I want to welcome all of you back who are here again for the manyth time. I appreciate you being here week after week. I love exploring and just talking shop with you. I also am overjoyed to pour into you each week. It lights me up to know that you guys are taking this information and going off and doing amazing things with it. So happy to be here with you. For those of you joining for the first time, also welcome. If you're watching on the replay, we love having you here. You don't have to be live with us, but certainly if you are live and you can't come on camera or be off mute, you can still connect with us in the chat. If you're watching on the replay, also use the chat, leave your comments below, and I will gladly answer all the questions. You guys tend to direct email me, which is super okay also. And if you feel courageous enough to leave comments in the comment section, I will always be kind back to you in the comments and answer you directly. Muscle tightnesses today are sponsored by the Shots Method Mastery Practitioner Program, where movement and manual practitioners become experts at navigating and resolving chronic pain with every client every time. That's what we're up to here in our Mastery Practitioner training track. Many of my Mastery practitioners show up here each week. Lots of you also listen on the replay. Yes, Lori, awesome. So love having you here to bounce ideas off of and also to continue to pour into you. I love that my Mastery practitioners show up each week because it's an honest contribution to let us all know that learning the body is a lifetime track, right? Learning the body is a lifetime track. It doesn't mean that whatever training you had before this wasn't adequate or that whatever training you're going through at the moment isn't spectacular. It is. If I'm leading it, I know it is because I know the curriculum. And we still get to learn the body. Like we still get to keep learning. I'm always still learning, right? So the goal is to be in the presence of someone who knows more than you, right? You don't really want to be the smartest person in the room when it's about anatomy and resolving client issues, because then you're only reviewing what you already know, which is a great way to learn, by the way, to repeat things. But if you really want to stretch and go into the capacity that you have as a practitioner and what you get to learn and what the body might present with, that's a lifetime game. So you want to always be in the company of people who know more than you and who are willing to share it and teach it in a way that you can absorb it and utilize it. So for that, I love that you guys seem to trust me with that. That is definitely my role here for you on Tuesdays each week. And so let's dive in, shall we? Shall we dive into, yeah? Muscle, Lori's like, yes. Okay, muscle tightness for the win. So before we dive into type number 3 and type number 4, who has type 1 and 2 that you want to just do a real brief recap for us? Either the name and the qualities of it, or the name and the qualities and what to do about it, because we did cover all of that. Anybody want to share anything about muscle tightness number 1 and muscle tightness number 2? Anything?
I can.
Go on, Cheryl, you got this.
Okay, the contractile tightness was the first one that we had gone through. It's when the origin and the insertion move towards each other and are held in that position. The spindles overlap. What other things? Nice. The function comes, I'm kind of reading from my notes too, which helps me to just refresh too.
Yeah.
It is the only tightness that we get to stretch.
Yes. Yeah, Cheryl. Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, what else? The function comes from the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So good. Cheryl, amazing notes. Can I hot seat you on a question? Are you open to that?
Okay.
So you said all the right things about contractile stress, what it is, um, what the muscle's doing in that instance. It's the only one that you stretch. Do you happen to remember how a muscle can become contractile stressed?
Um, it's it's usually happens when I mean it is brought about by something that you do, like falling and catching yourself was one of the things I remember us talking about. Does that answer it?
Yes, it does. And I think it's important to keep that in mind because we don't want to confuse muscle tightness types with muscle action because a muscle is going to contract. That's its job. It's going to contract all day long. If you let it, that's what it wants to do. And a body's designed to have muscles contracting and moving. But when it's contractile tightness, when the muscle is stressed into a contractile state, that's when it all, we're now in a new lane. We're in a different lane. It's like, oh, we're a little off track here. So how did we get off track? And how do you determine between a muscle that's contracting and the muscle that's contractile stressed? More importantly, it's how did it get contractile stress? Because that's what you really want to resolve. How did that happen? And oftentimes with contractile stress, it is under some sort of force or load.
Okay.
Yep. So it's going to naturally contract. All muscles are going to naturally contract. We like that. That's the green zone. We're all thumbs up on that. And contractile stress is when it's held, as you said, Cheryl, held in that position. But how does that happen? Through load, through some sort of load or force. Okay. Awesome. Amazing. And yes, that's the one and the only one that you get to remedy by lengthening or stretching. Mm-hmm. Practitioners get themselves into tricky spots when they start to handle all the tightness types with stretching. So we don't want to do that anymore. And that's why we're here learning the muscle tightness types. Awesome. Who wants to give us a recap on Tensile? We spent some time on that. I think some like worthy time on, I think, Lori, you mentioned that it was a big aha for you. And also if it's okay with you, Lori, I'm just going to highlight the learning curve here as we talked about in the beginning. So Lori has been a mastery practitioner for a long, long time. Amazing practitioner, totally knows her shit, absolutely creates results week in and week out. And repeating something and learning it again can bring new awarenesses. And that was my takeaway from your takeaway, Lori, last week that you shared in the student lounge. You're like, one more time through and I see it differently now. That's the point, right? Like sometimes even when we know stuff, we get to review it. And so I want you guys to give yourselves permission for that. Review it as many times as you need to until you feel like you squeezed all the lemon juice out of that rock. There is no more juice left, right? You've tapped that well dry and now it's onto something new that you get to learn. Sometimes it takes repeating. Also, in context is a great way to apply, right? So some of the things when Lori, afterward, when you and I spoke, learning something, you can learn it. You can know it. You can have excellent notes. You can actually even understand your notes, right? Sometimes I take notes and I'm like, what did I just write? The notes are meaningless to me, right? You can have notes that you actually understand and you can refer to with value. And applying the information is not the same as knowing the information. So once you apply something that you've learned that you have great notes on, you might see it differently with clarity or with more questions. And both are totally okay because the application of what we learn and the application of our body knowledge takes us to a new place of understanding and then being able to create results. So that's also okay to do. Doesn't mean you didn't learn it the first time or the sixth time. It just means you're seeing it differently now. And that's a good thing. We want to always stay in the learning and the openness. Okay, Laura. So what was your takeaway from Tensile last week? If you're willing to share.
Yeah, I can go over. I got Cheryl, just like you, I got my notes. So with tensile, the origin and insertion are at their furthest distance away from one another, and they're held there. So they can't contract, they can't, I don't know, can they go further? They're at their furthest, right?
They're at their furthest.
They're at their furthest. So they can't contract, they can't go any further. I wrote that, oh, this was an aha for me, that the discomfort, the pain, if you will, could be on either side of the lever system. It could be on the part that's over lengthened, and then so if one's over lengthened, the other's over contracted.
Only sometimes, right?
Only sometimes, right? Yeah. So, oh, right. So the muscle. So there's 2 points to that. The muscle on the opposite side of the lever is under contractile stress. That was point one. Like that's the. I think we identified like that's the. I don't want to say it's the easier one, but it's a little bit more direct, right? In my head, I'm like, oh, got it. That makes sense. So how to remedy that is to lengthen the contractile stressed side. The second one, which I have a huge amount of notes on, and it was, I think it's the same, right? It was, we were lengthening the muscle with load bearing or pressure or extra weight. That was the one, I think that was the example that you used with gardening and the lats. So how to remedy that was bring the body back into its neutral alignment, bring the muscles back into neutral, and then get them contracting and do it, the lever system, like get the lever system functioning how it should.
Exactly. Yep. Activate the lever. Great. Amazing. Yep. So there's a sort of a two-prong with tensile stress. So it's a little more complicated how it happens. It's a little more complex in how you resolve it. And you want to be a little more thoughtful about, is it this or is it that when it comes to tensile? And the thing that you said at the beginning, Lori, the ends of the muscles, the attachments of the muscles are at their furthest distance. So can they go further? As you were logicking it out, you're like, no, they can't, which means we don't want to stretch tensile stress muscles. That's where we get into like, oh my goodness, I did the thing. I irritated a muscle and now there's inflammation, or now there's more soreness, or now they have decreased function. But I thought that I was just eliminating the tightness. That absolutely would work if it was contractile tightness. But if it's tensile tightness, it's the opposite. And it could actually cause them discomfort or even harm the tissues. Right. So I love those two juxtaposed each other. So we can see like, oh my goodness, wait, it makes logical sense. But I think I might have missed that a few times before so far up until now. Totally fine. Like give yourself some freedom to learn as you grow and apply differently going forward. But I really want to make sure that everyone's super clear on that tensile stress because it's a unique one. Does everybody feel good about that?
Could you give an example of fixing tensile issues? An example of balancing the lever system and working on the opposite side?
Yeah. So you mean remedying the tensile stress muscle?
Yeah.
Yeah, without contractile on the opposite side? Just tensile for tensile sake? Yeah. So the formula, if you will, I'm saying formula, I kind of hesitated and bumbled there. It's not really a formula, but the order that we talked about last week is the order. When a muscle is under tensile stress and the origin and insertion are too far apart from each other, you must bring them back closer together. But I wouldn't say that step one is then to ask that over lengthened muscle to contract. It's too far it's, like the fulcrum doesn't even really handle that. So the way to create that is to bring that muscle back to neutral length. And neutral is optimal alignment in the body everywhere. So every joint can be optimized. And we do go over that in the practitioner training program for sure. And I have a masterclass coming up for you guys in about 6 weeks. I'll let you know. I was like, oh, this is perfect. We'll go over just exactly that. So it does take us some time to go over every single joint in the body, Gary, but let me give you one example. So in the gardening example for continuity for what we were already talking about, if we have Murph here gardening, and I can't make his body do that because he's bolted in this lumbar curve, but if we have him folded forward in, a hip flexion and the lumbar spine curvature is reversed, those joints aren't in what we would call neutral. They're in flexion. They're in a version of flexion, but they're not being flexed by the muscles here that do flexion of the spine. They're just lengthened because of the posture. Okay, so that would be the setup. And then when the arms are extended forward and the lats are connected down here, the load bearing becomes tensile stress in this region right here. So it's not just the lats, it's a couple muscles that are at stake, if you will, in the tensile game in this area of the body. And that gardener absolutely has low back discomfort. We agree on that, yeah? Okay, so the remedy then, to shorthand the remedy, is to take this curve back to optimal alignment. Because just returning the curve to optimal alignment will then bring the length of the muscle back to a neutral distance, and then you can start activating the lever, meaning action is contraction and on from there. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and you would apply that everywhere. Just bring that muscle back to its optimal length, optimize the alignment in that joint, and then activate the lever system. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great.
I have a question, Gina.
Yeah.
So in some of my training, we've been taught that when a muscle is contracted, so it's shortening, if you do the shortening for it, it will release and let go. So is that a similar scenario to bring it back to alignment and do the shortening for it? Is that kind of what's behind what that teaching is about?
No, but it's an interesting concept, and I'm happy that you brought it up for distinction. So alignment of the joints and alignment of the structure of the body is alignment, meaning, I mean, you guys would probably recognize it as posture, right? And there's a way to optimize the quote unquote posture in every joint of the body. And as you can imagine, every joint that would take us a while to go through. What you're talking about though for muscle tightness is when a muscle, and you said it, when a muscle's in a tightened position, you can tighten it to its maximum by activating the contraction to then get it to let go. And that's a muscle by itself. So a muscle that's shortened, you make it contract even more, and then it sort of like gives up the fight. And then you have access to use it to do something with whatever the something is next.
Would that be in the case of a cramp, a muscle cramp?
Not necessarily, although it could be. It would always be in the case though of a muscle that's contractile.
Right, but this is not make the muscle contract. This is do more contraction for it. So make the distance shorter for it so it doesn't have to do that anymore and it stops.
You're talking about passive manipulation?
Yes.
So that would not work for tensile stress muscle, by the way.
Okay.
Okay. It might, but my clinical experience tells me that that's a slow road to get it there. So the fast track is optimize the alignment, and then you can address the muscles, not in the opposite, which is a really interesting place, Rhonda, because I know that you're a manual practitioner, and that's what manual practitioners are used to. They do all the work.
Right.
And it's great. I right there with you, my love, for sure. Here's the thing that we all get to know. The body is designed to move. So to remedy issues in the body, we must remedy how it moves and how it's aligned to do that movement. And every time a massage therapist defaults to doing it all, they're angels from heaven, and they don't make it easy for the body to remedy itself because they're doing the work for it. So you get to watch the balance as a manual practitioner. How much of it are you doing versus how much are you retraining the body to do for itself? There's places for all of it. I welcome all practitioners, movement and manual. Massage therapy is needed just as much as Pilates, just as much as acupuncture, just as much. We're all needed. But if we're talking about remedying function, and it's always function if we're talking about muscle tightness and contraction, because that is the function, the contraction part, right? Or the lengthening and response. We're actually talking about a cog in the function wheel. So if we're remedying function, we must utilize and repattern the function to fully resolve the problem. Otherwise, we've just taken all the pressure off and our clients leave super relieved and happy, and we feel accomplished, and they may or may not get themselves into that same pickle again. And that's where we get into the Groundhog Day part of it. right? So awesome question, Rhonda. And we all get to just think about that, right? Movement practitioners and manual practitioners are not on opposite sides against each other. They're on both sides of what's needed for the body. And we get to meet in the middle. We get to know how the body functions as manual practitioners, and we get to understand its design thoroughly as movement practitioners and mix a little bit about what we're doing. I'm not saying do movement if you're not a movement certified person, or manual if you're not licensed to do that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as we're approaching whatever resolution we're coming up with for our clients, we must blend those ideas together. How is the body designed to move? Is this person moving that way? Is that what caused the problem? What did cause the problem? The problem wasn't them laying on a massage table. The problem was how they moved, or moved well or didn't move well. So we get to know that as manual practitioners. That's the point. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You guys look very thoughtful. Everybody good? Okay. Question for you guys, just as a sort of self-reflection on learning. Are you getting more information by reviewing at the beginning what you already learned the week before? Are you finding that it's refining your knowledge and your notes? And yeah, I love that that is your reality. And I wanted to highlight that because sometimes we bypass that, like, oh God, why didn't I know that last week? Instead of recognizing that there's value in reviewing what you already know with a new outline, with a new viewpoint, by saying it instead of reading it, like however you do it in review, there's always value for you. And that's because of how your brain learns. It's because of how your brain is wired to learn. And that's not only true for us, but it's also true for the people we're working with. So especially movement people who are walking your people through movement and homework for that. Certainly the SHOTS method has homework as well. You want to remember that that's how people learn. It's not you just say it once and they got it, or they take notes while they're with you and then they're done. Sometimes you need to repeat it a little bit. And it's not because you weren't clear, and it's not because they weren't listening. It's because we even learn that way. That's the way the brain is wired. Review is what creates synapses, which creates patterns of knowledge. So just keep that in mind as you're working with your people, especially movement people. But again, I believe that we're all addressing function at some level. You need to repeat some things and just find a way to make that feel really comfortable for you. Like saying it 2 or 3 times in the same way, they'll hear it differently with each iteration. And that's really generous.
Doesn't the body have to relearn those movements as well? Relearn the healthy movements, as well as we know what it is, but the body has to, oh, I can do this now when I couldn't do it before.
100%, Gary. Yep. And that's part of what Rhonda and I were getting to as well. Like if the body has to learn it, those of us who are manual practitioners who just do all the work while the person's passive and then the person stands up and goes on with their life, we know now that we're not fully resolving it. We're doing amazing work for them. But if we're resolving functional patterns or how they got into the pain that they came with, you just said it, body has to relearn how to do that. How's it going to do that? I mean, it's an open-ended question, right? How is it going to do that? Are you going to be the movement practitioner that repatterns them? Or do you have a movement practitioner in your community that you refer back and forth to? You take care of the deep tissue stuff because you're the manual person, and they take care of the movement stuff because this body gets to learn how to do gardening differently, or whatever it is that they're up to that caused the issue in the first place. You get to partner with people. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be every type of practitioner. But if your interest is in resolving it for your clients that you're serving, you'll partner with someone to make sure that they get the resolution. Yeah. So we don't have to hang the moon. We don't have to be everything and all the things, but we get to know what the solution is and be generous enough to share that with the people that we're serving. Anna?
I keep going back to tensile stress, because it's the more challenging one to resolve for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Where does, and I think gardening, and I'm super guilty of exactly your example.
I know, Anna. I can tell. Once we learn, sorry to interrupt you, but once we learn how the body works and we learn how people get themselves into trouble, you can almost tell exactly what your client's been up to.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why we want to learn function, so that we can be like, I know exactly what your body was doing. I got it. I can see it in my mind's eye, like I was there with you. Except if I was there with you, I'd be hounding you to stop doing that thing that you were doing that brought you to me, but let's just resolve it. Okay, so go ahead, Anna.
So my question is, where does rest come into this? Because I'm thinking, you know, when that happens to me, usually if I'll just lay down on my mat, you know, and just give it a rest before I try to do anything.
Mhm.
So, yeah, how does rest fit into it? Or maybe what I'm doing when I lay on my mat, you know, maybe I'm bringing my body back to optimal alignment. He says, smiling.
Okay, working it out in your own mind. Yeah. So interesting question, Anna. And I know somewhere in a group we talked about resting at one point. So was it here, Cheryl? It was okay. A couple weeks back. So we've talked about resting at some point, and here's what I would offer too, Anna. Like, when you say rest, what does that mean? 5 minutes, or does that mean don't go to the gym in my normal 3 or 4 day a week rest? Like, what does rest mean, right? And again, it's open-ended, but we get to be really thoughtful. You mastery practitioners, you know this. Every word your client says has meaning. So when they say rest, what do they mean by rest, right? Because if we get, and I want to jump too far ahead here, but if we get too far down the line, we create atrophy, which is not going to help the issue. It's going to quiet one issue and create another, which doesn't solve either of them. So what does rest mean? I would qualify that. If it's just 5 minutes laying on your back after you've been in a hunched over position gardening, is that resting? And I'm saying, honestly, just what does resting mean? For me, 5 minutes is a good rest. 20 minutes is a great power nap. 3 days is also resting, but I would qualify that differently. Right? If I didn't like leave the house for 3 days and I was on the couch or something, I can't remember if that's happened recently at all, but would just, you know, I would qualify the word. So if you say rest to your client, be specific about what that is. And if they say that they rested it, be probing in how long and what were they doing while they were resting. Here's the other thing about resting. If I was just, quote, resting, skipped the gym and laid on the couch, I'm not optimal, right? Lounging is not necessarily helpful. So was I lounging or was I resting in Shavasana with my low back not on the mat, right? So if we've said that in the gardening exercise, for example, and let me know if this is too much, you guys. We've said in the gardening example that this lumbar curve would be reversed, right? It would be a version of spine flexion. So is it possible to lay flat on your back and have your lumbar curve on the surface that you're laying on? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tuck your belly button down and press your low back to the ground. Yeah, exactly. So if the mechanical issue came from a non-optimal alignment here in this section of the spine, if I rest, just to use the word rest, this is why we're qualifying the word rest. If I rest by laying flat on my back, but I'm literally flat and my lumbar spine is touching the mat, have I rested those muscles or are they still in tensile? Wait, they're still lengthened. So the remedy for tensile is to bring the origin and insertion back towards each other by optimizing the alignment, which may or may not happen in quote unquote rest. What kind of rest? What type of rest? How long was the rest? What position was your body in the rest? Okay, so that's my long answer for your question.
Great.
Yeah. For value there? Yep. Sounded something good? Okay, great. Amazing. Okay, so shall we move on to muscle tightness number 3 and 4? Okay. What's in muscle tightness number 3?
Turgor.
Practitioner. Turgor. Yes, Turgor it is. Okay, so we've talked about Turgor once before. We've talked about Turgor several times, actually. And just like everything we've already said from the top of the hour today, if learning it, hearing it, exploring it a few times can create more clarity. So the word itself the word itself, I think, is either super clear for people or super confusing for people. So I just want to, Gary's like, yep, that would be me. Okay, awesome. So if we use the definition of the word turgor, turgidity is more commonly the word, or it's actually turgidity is the word that they use to define the word turgor. If you do like a Google search on, meaning of turgor. And so it's never helpful when they use the same word to define itself. Like that's like, they should be illegal to do that in a dictionary, but I digress. And then if you look up turgidity, turgidity has lots of meanings, meaning not lots of meanings, but lots of circumstances that would be defined as turgidity or turgid, right? Turgor is what I say. So there's turgor in cells, right? Like the pressure against the cell wall to keep it plump. That's a positive thing. Some turgor we want, like in the example of turgor in a cell. We want the cells to be plump. Cells have lots of things that they have to do. If they're sort of laying flat like pancakes, they can't do their job. So we want that intracellular pressure, if you will, to create that pressurized plumpness in a cell. But that pressurized plumpness in other areas of the body is not what we want, like in a muscle, right? So some turgor can be due to lymphatic buildup. Some turgor can be caused by underlying trigger points where there's pressure against the muscle that makes that muscle feel like it's being pushed and pressed. Think about that inside of a cell kind of pressure. And there's also a rigidity that comes in those tissues. And when we get to the rigidity part, that's what I focus on when I'm focusing on the final line of determining whether this tightness is turgor or a different type of tightness. So a little bit of background, I think, was valuable to share with you, like, well, what is actually happening in the muscle? And the way I explain it, being rigid, is that it's not contracting or lengthening. And it's not necessarily swollen or inflamed, although it could be, because based on the definition of turgidity, there can be some fluid buildup and inflammation that can cause that tension, if you will, in the muscle. The tension is the focal point that we're coming to here, that generalized tension that feels fixed in a muscle that isn't contraction tension or lengthen tension. But there's definitely tension. Right? Indisputable tension in the muscle. If it's caused by an underlying pathology, like inflammation or lymph or something like that, then that is the answer. That's what's causing the turgor, and getting rid of the turgor is not going to be really possible unless you get rid of the underlying cause of it, which may or may not be in your lane. And the person would still present with discomfort from the same type of discomfort they get from all muscle tension. Okay, so body doesn't have a wide vocabulary. Body's always communicating, but it doesn't have a very wide vocabulary of how to describe some things. Discomfort's discomfort. Pain is pain, right? Like a lot of pain, emergency pain is emergency pain. But the qualifiers and the cause of it are not going to be communicated through symptoms. It's up to us to understand that the symptom is a raised hand from the body, and what's causing that symptom is how we're going to solve the symptom. But the symptom itself is not the problem. What caused the symptom is the problem. Sometimes when it's up to turgored muscles, the symptom is discomfort, and it's tempting to want to go after it. And up until now, you might have wanted to stretch it or do some deep tissue work. But I'm inviting us to go a step further and find out what's causing that turgor. And if it's not in your lane, refer out. It's generous to do that. It's not generous to put them on the table and stretch them or, do light tissue instead of deep tissue. That's not generous. You're not solving the problem. I mean, maybe for the hour while they drove to you, it's, still generous touch is, whether it's you're assisting them in stretching or you're using manual therapy skills, is still a loving gesture. But leaving it at that and not telling them that there's an underlying thing that's causing this muscle to show up this way is not generous. It's keeping them in a rinse and repeat cycle because the cause is still there and it hasn't been addressed by you if it's out of your lane. Okay. There's a time though when, does this make sense to you guys? Are you following so far? Yeah, good. Okay. There is a time when triggered muscle tissue is in our lane as manual and movement practitioners, and it's still the same protocol, meaning you still get to find out what caused it and solve that. Because trigger doesn't just happen out of, just randomly. Muscles don't misbehave just because they feel like it. In fact, they feel like the opposite. They'd rather not be misbehaving because their job is to move and they'd like to do their job. They live to move. If something impedes that, they're not happy. So they'd always rather do the movement part of it. So we want to find out what caused the turgor. Okay. And again, remember that turgor is not specifically shortened fibers, contractile stressed, nor lengthened fibers, tensile stressed. But there is some type of pressure that this muscle is presenting with. And the way I describe it is it's kind of like working with a piece of wood, right? It's not necessarily a temperature difference, and you might feel like you can get in there, but you can't quite get it to comply, right? So manual practitioners who are used to literally taking muscle fibers and manipulating them to do things, in a turgid muscle, it's not going to want to do that. You're going to want to grab that muscle and grab hold of it and release it. And it's going to be like maybe a few cuss words, like, you got to be kidding me. And it'll like double down anyway. Because just like the other tightnesses that we've talked about so far, only one of them is responsive to deep tissue or stretch. And that's contractile. Turgor is not even one because it's not contracted. So it doesn't need stretched. That's not the remedy. And we know that because we know the lever system. So how do we resolve turgor? Great question. I think you're asking and wanting me to answer for you. Again, the way we solve something is by finding out what caused it. Okay. And if you guys like this type of strategic thinking, then you are mastery practitioners, whether you are in actually mastery or you're on the periphery. I'm telling you, this is what we do. We solve problems like this. Use your anatomy and then strategically think your way into a solution. That's what we're up to. So, and if you don't like this, you're probably not still here. So, so I just wanted to acknowledge that you guys are really working through, even in muscle tightness and what caused it, you're really working through some bigger concepts. So I want you to acknowledge that. If it's feeling a little bit out of reach or a tiny bit over your head, that's celebratory, because I'm here to teach you something new and you're stretching for it and you're still in the conversation. So acknowledge yourself for that before you feel like you're in the weeds. Okay, Val?
Yeah, I was just visiting this past week.
Okay.
Interesting. I have a softball playing granddaughter who slams her leg down when she pitches, and it's constantly tight. So's the other leg that's not the plant leg. And I got to looking at it and I said, this is turgid. It's constantly tight. I think I'm releasing it with a little bit of work, and it feels okay, but there's a lot of muscle tone there and it's not fat. And I said, you've got some lymph stuck in here. Your tissues are so tight. You're holding lymph, I think. And I did some MLD, but it was better, but it's still not resolved. And I'm like, what am I missing? So I'm wondering if we have some latent trigger points that I have missed on top of it, maybe a 2-for-1. So my mind is, this really was enlightening. It came right at the same time where my brain is going, but I'm kind of at that stump point going, So with the brainstorming on that, if you get layers, that would be involved with turgor as well, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Okay. So I think
anytime there's pressure in the muscle tissue that's not due to contraction or lengthening, turgor.
Right, because she doesn't have either. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you finally found it, Val. Good job.
Yeah,
okay,
that was wild.
Mm-hmm. So the solution, so we know that if a muscle's not contracting or lengthening, it's technically way off track. Okay, I don't want to say offline because it's that has meaning to some folks. But a muscle's job is to either contract or lengthen. Like, it's pretty black and white. So if it's very busy doing something else, It's very busy not doing its job. It's doing a job, but not what it was designed to do. And that's why Turgor causes, one of the reasons why Turgor causes discomfort, because the muscle's very busy doing something that's not its job by design, but it's busy. Okay. So again, the remedy for it is to find out what caused the Turgor. A really good example that I like to use is, and if you guys know trigger points, great. If you don't know trigger points, also great. If you do other techniques to release tissues, great. If you don't have other techniques outside of one main one that you use to release tissues, also great. I'm sharing this with you at the beginning because I don't want you guys to make up stuff. I just want you to follow the path of what caused the Turgor. It's really tempting when we're trying to problem solve something we're not super clear on to jump into the solution too quickly by going into other things we think it might be or other tools that we use to remedy it. And I'm just going to ask you to just take one step of pause first before you jump down into solution land. Okay, let's just understand like how Turgor gets created, because that's really where the solution is. Okay, all right. So let's use what Val?
That's what I'm trying to figure.
Yeah, exactly. So let's use one example, and there's as many examples as there are people, and as many examples in one person's body as there are muscles. So just hang tight. But let's say, for example, so we know that Murph, to the best of his ability, is by design. He's got a cervical curve here, and the back of his cranium is aligned with his thoracic, right? And he's got 4 curves in his spine. We know we need 4 curves in the spine. Okay, cool. But let's say, for example, he's a desk sitter and he works at a computer. Do you think that his head would be aligned over his shoulders if he's sitting? Gary's like, didn't even finish the sentence. I'm a hard no. Okay, what do you think his neck? What do you think his head and neck would look like then if he's just a desk sitter? Go ahead, Gary. Tell us. Forward. So his head would be forward. Okay, great. So let's go with the anatomy that we know. What muscles hold the head upright on the body in this position that he's in right now, that Murph's in right now? What muscles do that? Trapezius. Good. What else?
Levator.
Levator a little. Yeah.
Kind of.
A little. Yeah. What else?
Paraspinals, would that be one? They go up that? Yep.
Yep. Exactly. The cervical.
Splenius capitis.
Oh, capitis.
Rectus.
Yeah, I'm looking at my book. You got it, Val.
Yeah. So I love that you did that, Lori. Look, you guys, we can always refer to a reference book.
Mm-hmm.
I keep a reference book in my treatment setting as well. Most of it is for me to show clients what I'm working on, but I am not too proud to look it up if I can't remember. I'm like, I just blanked on what that muscle does. Wait, does that muscle do that also? Just look it up, right? You get to know the muscles and you get to have most knowledge about the muscles that you can work with, and you get to keep a reference book with you so that you can refer back to it. In order for us to resolve Turgor in a muscle, we've got to know A, what muscle, and B, what does that muscle do? It's the same as teaching movement. What muscle's doing the movement, and how does that muscle do the movement? What's the joint action, right? And that's true for manual and movement people alike. When you get into the land of when it all goes wrong, you've got to make it easy for yourself by knowing your anatomy, because you can't solve a problem if you don't know the parts in the problem. Okay. And I say that with love, like be honest to be a beginner. If you need to be a beginner for another minute in life during your practitionership and go back to the basics and refresh yourself so that you can feel empowered to take forward action, go do that. That's great to do. Like I said, when I start to forget secondary actions of muscles, I'm like, gee, you better have a little coffee date with your muscle book, right? Because I'm used to just working primary actions, and I need to keep myself fresh too. So be honest enough and humble enough to be a beginner when you need to. Okay, so here we are. We're in cervical paraspinals and trapezius to hold the head up in this position. When we have desk posture, what are those muscles doing?
Lengthening.
The ones in the back are lengthening. There's also muscles in the front that hold it. It's because it's a lever, front and back of the joints. So these muscles are lengthening and these muscles are shortening. Now, if that were true, that these muscles were lengthening and these muscles were shortening, what would the joint action be at this part of the body?
Flexion.
Flexion of the spine. So when we do flexion of the spine, what does that actually look like? Down. So when we're at our computer, are we looking down at our toes?
No.
Oh,
No.
So then what are we doing? What's the joint action?
Still flexion. It's just not as extreme.
Think again.
Extension's not neutral.
Extension of the head sometimes, because you're down and then your eyes, you tip
Yeah,
your
head's
head
not a
back.
joint. Head's not a joint. So don't put joint action on body parts unless it's a joint, because you'll confuse yourself.
Okay.
It's spine. It's either extension or flexion, right? Or neutral or optimal.
Okay, well, let's go back to our anatomy then. Where
Okay.
can movement happen in the body? Where can movement sorry about the light. Where can movement happen in the body?
Any joint.
Any joint.
Any
How many
joint.
joints? How many joints are up here?
What's it?
7.
7.
We have
Right.
7 possibilities of articulation.
Right.
We could have 7 different joint actions happening up here simultaneously.
Correct.
Anatomically speaking, it can happen. Okay, so with that in mind, if I'm sitting upright, neutral, I hope, neutral. And if I'm looking at my computer, if I'm in spine flexion,
Yeah.
but if I'm looking up at my computer,
Oh,
oh,
Oh, is
he's
that
spot here.
extension? Is that
What?
extension? Did
Mhm.
you go into like your
Extension up here,
Extension.
flexion down here,
an extension.
and hanging off the axis.
Oh my.
Right.
And hanging off the axis already puts tension on this part of the body because the body's trying to get my head back in alignment.
Mhm.
Did you get it?
So the
So
lower
it's a-
part was flexion, and when you look like a turtle. Then you
Yep.
extension. Okay. Wow.
Mhm. We know this by the anatomy. We have 7 possible joint actions available because there's movement at every joint.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean there is 7, but we know it's possible. So we want to use our anatomy to walk us through what's possible by design. And then if something went wrong, what's the design that I get to redress?
Yeah, you'd have to be right in extension of the next spine because otherwise your head would just fall forward. You have to have something holding it back because it's off the axis.
That's why suboccipitals are overworked.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was
Exactly.
going into, I forgot for like a second that we were in when it goes wrong. I'm like, no, spinal extension and flexion. And I'm like, oh, and this is when it isn't that. Got it.
Exactly. This is when it isn't that. Okay. So now we know that we've got a whole handful of joint actions going on. We have load because the head's now forward of the axis. So that could be tensile stress. It could be contractile stress because we know those 2 types of tightness have load involved in them and it's sustained. Do we see a prevalence of, oh, okay, wait. So let me back up 1 second. So what do you think that body posture would create then? Would it create a type of tension, a type of tightness symptom?
Yes.
Yeah. What type of
Okay.
symptoms and where? What type of symptoms would that cause and where?
Tensile in the lower vertebra and contractile in the upper.
Okay, so vertebra don't have contractile or tensile though, Val. I think you mean the
The
muscles in those
muscles,
areas.
the muscles, yes.
Okay. Okay. What else would that body habit cause? Where would the tension be and what would cause it?
Front, the back, sides,
Front, back, sides of what?
and the upper thoracic of the cervicals, but in the back you've got them going all the way down your back.
You've got what going all the way down the back?
tensile because it's forward and they're having to lengthen. They're trying to, now I've got myself turned around.
Well, your lower back would be affected too.
Mhm.
Yeah, because mostly I don't think we're going to stay in optimal in our lumbar.
Right. And then this.
So
Yeah.
that's where we've got
Yeah.
that over
So it does-
lengthening going all the way down.
Absolutely. So it can absolutely become like a domino effect because of alignment of the joints, which we've said several times now is the underlier of muscle tightness for sure. So in this situation, in this body posture, while there is load and there is tension and muscles are being lengthened and they are being contracted, it's not the same amount of load, for example, as the gardening example, where it's a lot of body weight and a lot of extraneous, right, pulling. It's just a little off. It's just a little off. I'm not saying it's okay. My point is, it would be less likely to be tensile and contractile stress in those two areas and more likely to be turgor. Because the muscles are just under pressure. They're not exactly at their maximum length like tensile is, because
Okay.
they're also sort of like shortened halfway. They start to tensile and then they get stopped from doing that, but they're off the axis. So they're contractile, but it's sort of like half cocked, all of it. And there's generalized tension because the body is trying to pull the head back onto the shoulders because that's where it's designed to be. So how many of you, this is the question I was going to ask earlier, how many of you see a prevalence of upper shoulder and side and back neck tension in clients that you serve? A lot, like all of us have our hands up, right? Yeah. Do you think that it's going to be resolved now that we know the source of it? Do we think it's going to be resolved by stretching their neck or doing some deep tissue or some cupping on their shoulders? No. How come?
Because Turgor isn't going to respond to that.
Go deeper, Val.
You need to put them in optimal alignment. Put them in neutral.
Okay.
Well, those
Before you
muscles
can
are,
work it. Before you can work it. At least I found that works best so far from since you have so lovingly taught us that.
Okay, awesome. Cheryl, you're going to add something?
well, the muscles are already stretched. They seem to be already lengthened. So we wouldn't want to stretch them, obviously.
Right. They're already lengthened and they're contracted at the same time, especially if you unpack the trapezius as one of the biggest contenders in the first muscle that we listed. It's one of the only muscles in the body that can be an antagonist to itself, which means it can literally be contracting and lengthening simultaneously. Right. Right. Exactly. So you're like, oh God, well, if I can lengthen and contract at the same time, then it doesn't mean I'm necessarily contractile or tensiled. I'm just busy. Again, the Turgor muscle is busy doing a job he's not meant to be doing, correcting things, postures, patterns, habits, etc. So the takeaway here that I want you guys to have is whether or not the muscle would respond to cupping or deep tissue or stretching, whether it would respond or not, a Turgor muscle is not happy. So it's injured is a very strong word. So I wouldn't say that the tissues are injured, but it is not an action in the muscle, but the muscle's up to something, which is like the start of the definition of an injured muscle. He's not active or acting the way he's designed, and he's under duress. That's the definition of Turgor, right? So not acting the way he's designed and under duress. So we don't want to just alleviate the duress without addressing what caused the duress, because what ends up happening is we alleviate the duress. Let's call it stretch or massage or cupping or whatever. We alleviate the stress and the person returns back to the habit that caused the Turgor in the first place. And now they're re-injuring themselves at the same site with the same tissues. And if they see you weekly, it's rinse and repeat weekly. Not only is that not helpful to the tissues to perpetuate a re-injury, but it's also highly stressful for the nervous system. So we're not doing a favor for our clients to dig our elbows in to their turgid trapezius muscle. In everybody's shoulders, you could find lumps and bumps along the way universally. You just can, and it's getting worse the more we use tech, right? Smartphones and computers. It's just getting worse. I remember a time early on in my career, like early on, like in the first 5 years, and you know, remember it was back in the dark ages before the wheel was developed. But I remember in that window of time when I would work on clients, I could tell, given the density of their upper cervical paraspinals and their suboccipitals, I could tell right then if they were an attorney or not. I happened to have a lot of attorneys early on in my private practice, and it's because they were the ones looking down more than anybody else. But now we've all got computers, we've all got laptops, we're on one right now, and we all have cell phones, right? There was a time when that wasn't true. Like, I remember there was a time in my life I did not walk around with a cell phone. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I remember there was a time, because I remember the year I got my cell phone. So I remember, my point in sharing all this is I remember a very distinctive time when the tissues, the soft tissue in the people I was working on changed to become more universally turgid, right? And that, again, the remedy for that is to not release the turgor, because what ends up happening is they re-injure themselves. They create duress back in the same tissues that you already worked on. And for those of you who are manual practitioners, you know that whenever you do deep tissue work to a muscle, you create the startup of another injury, right? You're changing the blood flow, you're changing the fluids, you're stripping muscle fibers, you're peeling apart adhesions, you're creating an invasive, productive effect on those tissues, right? That's why deep tissues not always feel good for people, because it's productive, for lack of a better word. So if they come in with muscles that are turgid under duress, and we take them through a deep tissue, I'm going to make you comply, which is also irritating for the tissues, and they go back to their desk and re-injure themselves through the same pattern, we've actually done them a disservice. And I would say that we've actually done them harm. You got to know the source of turgor, and you got to be able to identify turgor and not just go after it to release it the way we're all so conditioned to do when we're newbies, because we can create a problem for them. Okay.
So you started on this whole discussion on trigger points. and then you went on to the discussion of where we are. So
yeah.
How are trigger points related to this then?
So I didn't start the conversation with trigger points, but I mentioned at the start of the conversation that trigger in muscles could also be underlying trigger points that are creating pressure on the muscle. There's lots of things that could cause turgor in a muscle. And just like turgor, by the way, Gary, the same thing goes for trigger points. Muscles don't just spontaneously create a trigger point. It's in response to stress.
Mm-hmm.
So what caused that trigger point? If you know how to alleviate the trigger points, awesome. But if we don't alleviate what caused the trigger point, it's the same formula as turgor. It's rinse and repeat. It's rinse and repeat. So muscle fibers appear in the example that I gave you, the head posture from computer, which is super common for all of us now. It could just be turgor. It could be turgor with latent trigger points underneath it. It could also be no trigger points and turgor with some inflammation. So there's lots of precursors, if you will, or underlying changes that would be associated with turgor. And that's my point. What caused them? Because that's what we get to remedy. Just going after the muscle to alleviate the tension in it is not the answer. It's part of the solution, but it's not the answer. And it's not what we do first if we want to prevent harm. Okay. Okay, darlings. There's also a form of turgor that we are not going to address, And when this keeps happening because the conversation is so juicy. I really honestly thought we were going to wrap up tightness today, but that's okay. We will absolutely wrap it up next week. And when we do, we'll review again on Turgor. So give you guys some time to contemplate and consider, work with your folks that you found Turgor present in and see what you create this week. And when we come back next week, I'll share with you the final information I have for you on Turgor and when not to treat it at all. And then we'll wrap up with our 4th muscle tightness, and that should be a wrap. We'll have spent the month fully and thoroughly going over muscle tightness. Sound good? Okay, my friends, thank you so much for being here and for contributing to such a rich conversation. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate the amazing work